All right, I'd now like to welcome back to the show a very special guest. It is CC. He's at Keep Betting Co. on Twitter. Corby, what's up? Welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Preseason futures looked well. I think for the show, like basically 6-3. So you talked me onto Virginia but during the show, and that was one of the sweatiest bets of the year. But listen, a dub's a dub. We were talking about it before the show. Colorado, dub a dub. However you got to get it.
Yeah, we were just talking about it, and UVA was one that I loved, got you on, and it seemed really good because early on in the season they looked as bad, if not even worse, than I thought they were going to be. And then they started to get a little bit better when they made a quarterback change. Had the upset over UNC, but yeah, we got it home. And then we were saying we did a team we're going to talk about later. We did both play the under on Louisville, which ended up being a terrible bet because
Completely
here they
wrong.
are playing for the conference championship. But
But I will say,
uh,
just like a little spiel, sorry. It wasn't the worst bet. I mean, like they had 7 games
no,
within a touchdown. They got really, I mean, I wouldn't even say lucky. They were good, don't get me wrong. But like there were a lot of games that could have coin flipped the other way.
for sure. Um, and speaking of futures, I was just going to run through this really fast. This doesn't even really have anything to do with you, but just for people that have been listening, listen to all the previews preseason and been listening all year. I do have a couple conference championship futures that I gave out that are alive. So I'm going to run through those really quick. I did have App State plus 750 to win the Sun Belt, who's coming into this game as underdogs, but much better than plus 750. And then Boise State plus 200 to win the Mountain West has made it here thanks to the computer ratings that decided who made the Mountain West Conference Championship, which we can touch on that when we get to that game, which is crazy. Florida State plus 150 to win the ACC, now favorites in that game. Washington plus 375 to win the Pac 12, who are big underdogs, but again, better than plus 375. And then probably my best preseason conference future bet, which was Texas plus 125 to win the Big 12. Now 15 and a half point favorites in the Big 12 championship game. So a couple of those looking pretty good. A couple of them still would need an upset. And I'm honestly just letting all of them ride. I think there's no point in like a plus 200 Boise State to win the Mountain West. Like there's no point in hedging that. Like the point of making that bet is to have them as a 2.5 point favorite in the Mountain West Conference Championship game and just let it ride. So I'm just letting all those ride and hoping for the best. Pretty confident in Texas. Florida State is in a coin flip. Boise State's in a coin flip. And maybe you get the upset from Washington or App State would make it awesome. But just wanted to touch on those really quick and let everybody know that I will not be hedging at all. So that's my plan. But we can get into the games. Going to start with Friday night, just in case people listen to this, want to listen to part of it on Friday for the Friday games and the rest on Saturday morning or something like that. Going to do the Friday night games first. There's two Friday night games. The first one is the Conference USA championship game. New Mexico State is around 11 and a half point dog at Liberty. The total is 56 and a half. This is a few of these group of five conference championship games are true home games. This is a true home game for Liberty. And Conference USA has not had a ton of juice this year. Liberty's kind of just made it into the top 25 at the end of the season. They are undefeated, but really have kind of gone under the radar just because there are not very many good teams in this conference. But New Mexico State's another team that's been really exciting. They're 11-2 against the spread this year. Have been one of the best against the spread teams in the country. They have the quarterback Diego Pavia, who has been there for a couple of years and has had some monster games this year. He's played really well. And just one more thing before we get into the matchup. There are a couple of these spots. Both of the Friday night games are rematches of regular season games. New Mexico State lost 33-17, 16-point loss to Liberty in the regular season matchup. And this is going to be something you see a lot from people that don't really know what they're talking about as they break down these games is like, you get both camps. You get the people of it's really hard to beat a team twice. Like, oh, are you going to be able to beat this team twice in a row? But then you're also going to have the people be like, oh, well, Liberty won by 16 in the regular season. So they're obviously way better. But just for reference, in since 2005, in these revenge spots in conference championship games, where a team lost in the regular season, they're 26 and 25 against the spread in the conference championship game. So there's really no edge at all either direction. It's sometimes the team is just better and they're going to win again, and sometimes circumstances are completely different. So there's not really much to that as we go through Oregon, Washington, and I think Miami, Toledo. Was that yeah, Miami, Toledo. The first three games we're going to talk about are the three rematches. So, do you have anything on that, the rematch aspect, or just this game in general?
Yeah, I would say if you think if you think that you're betting a rematch and that's like some clause that sports books aren't aware of and they don't have
Yeah.
like this profound edge behind, they are also aware that they played a game. I would assume they're probably more aware because they had to create the line. Like you might not even have bet on the game, but yeah, anything that is this easy to see is usually baked into market. And I will say there are edges to be had, and I'll talk about one that I believe in the Liberty game, but I don't think that it's revenge. It's more when did they play and how have the teams developed since
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah, because again, we'll talk about that in a minute with Washington, Oregon. Washington was only a 3 point home underdog the first time they played, and now they're 9.5 point underdogs on the neutral, which is like obviously a huge change in the odds, huge change in the perceptions of these two teams since that game, despite the fact that Washington won the game. So that's a very unique situation when it comes to that. But yeah, these teams play early in the season, completely different, home road, neutral field, like all these situations are completely different. Miami, Ohio, Toledo, like they're playing a rematch, but Miami has a different quarterback than they had in that game. Like it's all different. But do you have anything you like in this game, or just any matchups that you think are favorable?
Yeah, so I didn't bet this yet. I'm waiting to hopefully get a 10. This has fallen to Liberty, basically 11. And it kind of comes back to this idea that like these teams have played each other, and I think everybody's going to look at that matchup and they're going to think, hey, like 16-point game, et cetera, et cetera. Think what you want. This is a Liberty team who has a new coach. Like literally, they were week 2 into a new scheme heading into that game. So it's like who has become better week over week. And yes, Pavia's found his own. He kind of became like a national icon, and they beat Auburn, which if you've watched Auburn, except for the Alabama game, like I it was a surprise that they won, but it wasn't a surprise that it was as close as it was. But I think as a team overall, this Liberty team has become significantly better than when they played New Mexico State in week 2, significantly in the impact of like more than New Mexico State has even gotten good. So I am not betting an 11, but just looking through first half lines, you can get Liberty first half minus 6.5. I think that's a pretty good number. Being up by 7.5, I wouldn't lay a flat 7, but Liberty first half 6.5. I like a good bit here.
Yeah, I kind of like that angle because I don't think it's going to be like a massive blowout. I do think New Mexico State's going to be able to hang in a little bit, and like you said, like the anything over 10 on the full game plus 11.5 opens up a 17-point game, backdoor touchdown in a conference championship game. A team's not going to quit; like they're going to be going until the final whistle, trying to score, even if it's a 17-point game, especially in a conference like this. So that is a little worrying, but Liberty is definitely a better team. And I will say, if there's one of these games that you like a short favorite, like I guess really the only ones that would apply would be like Boise State or Tulane or Florida State, and you don't want to worry about the points, you could pair them with Liberty because I do think I don't really see a path to Liberty losing this game, especially on their own home field. I think is a huge advantage over some of these other conference championship games. Um, and yeah, Liberty has gotten better as the years gone on them, and they've just kind of gotten to the point where people have not been paying as much attention to them because their last few games of the season, they're just 14-point favorites, 14-point favorites, 26-point favorites, 18-point favorites in their last 4 games of the season. So they've kind of just gone under the radar because they've not really played anybody good, and it's just kind of been not worth watching, but they've dominated a lot of their games and a lot of these teams that they've been playing. And yeah, I think the only thing you can say is how good New Mexico State has been against the spread. They've just managed to hang in games and be tough. But one of the games they didn't cover is this game against Liberty. So
I have a prop. I'm just like scrolling through to see if I like anything just significantly on this game. Um, you can get Caden. I don't even know how you say his first name. Salter, Liberty quarterback, passing yards over 170, minus basically 120, 115, 170 yards. The only issue is just scrolling back through, and I haven't watched this game, I haven't watched any tape, but Salter only threw 11 passes last game versus a UTEP team who's just miserable. I imagine they just didn't have to throw the ball. And so
mhm.
that's probably pushing. He had 22 yards. And if he only throws only completes 4 passes, it's going to happen again. But again, we talked about this idea that they ran a new offense, a new scheme. They have a new coach. And the first time they played this New Mexico State team, he had 276 yards. So is he 100 yards worse? Is this New Mexico State defense 100 yards better? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Also, if you've watched New Mexico State, I'm sure you've gotten to watch. They chunk the ball. They throw high explosive, high intensity plays. Pavia, one of the more just athletic quarterbacks. So I could see this like being much more open and open to 3-and-outs, open to maybe fast scores, just ways to get Salter the ball more frequently.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of possessions in this. So anything like that, player prop overs, or even the game over, I wouldn't hate because, like I said, I think both teams are just going to keep trying to score. I don't think this is going to be a very like conservative play calling on either side, or like I think both teams are in the mindset of we're going to have to go put up a number to win this game, and they're both just going to kind of go for it. So I think there should be a lot of possessions, a lot of action. So should definitely be a good game to watch from a neutral perspective as well. Um, yeah, I mean, I would be, yeah, I agree with that. I think it goes over. I don't play a ton of props, but that makes a ton of sense to me. That yeah, I think yeah, last game I think they literally just sat on the ball against UTEP and didn't want to risk anything leading into this game.
That's what I assumed. I didn't watch it, but I assume that probably has some influence as to why this number is so low. But 170, I mean, man, I'll probably
Yeah,
bet that personally.
yeah, that seems crazy. But if we're good there, we can move on to
Yep,
Oregon, Washington.
your boy.
Oregon, I'm I it's tough. I mean, I'm wearing my shirt,
Yeah, I see it.
my Penix shirt, and it's I don't know, it's like a real mixture of emotions. Oregon 9.5 point favorite going into this game. The total 65 and a half. And as somebody I've been all over this Washington team for 2 years now, all over Michael Penix. I have a 66-1 national title future on Washington this year, which in reality is like great value, but they have to win this game, obviously, for that to matter. And so it's like a mixture of emotions because they went undefeated. They're playing in the conference championship game. You win and you're in the college football playoff. Like, ideally, as a Washington fan or somebody with a Washington future, that's like an incredible place to be in college football. Only 4 teams make the playoff, and you're guaranteed a spot if you win. Like, that's amazing. But at the same time, you're looking at this line, you're looking at the way that the market has been all over Oregon in this game, and how it's just screaming Oregon is going to win and probably win somewhat convincingly. That it's just I've been very conflicted on like I'm just worried I'm going to turn this game on and it's going to be all Oregon and I'm going to be just really depressed watching it. To get so close and then not really get there in the conference championship game would be tough. But I mean, anything can happen. Obviously, Washington has literally already beat this team this year, so it's not like it's insurmountable that they could win this game. But it is going to be tough since they played. It really has been a tale of two different teams since Washington beat Oregon. Oregon has just like turned it on and just dominated everybody. It's not like they've played the toughest schedule in the world, which there is something to that, but they have played a couple decent teams. They had to go on the road to Utah, which is one of the toughest places to play. They had to play Oregon State in a big rivalry game where they dominated, but then you find out the next day the Oregon State coach had already signed a deal to be the new head coach at Michigan State before that game happened. So maybe there's something there where the result isn't as good as it appeared if he was not fully invested in that game. And Washington has struggled. They almost lost to Arizona State in a disgusting game. They almost lost to Oregon State in, again, that was the Oregon State Washington game on the road at Oregon State. It was a really tough place to play, and it was pouring rain and freezing cold the whole game. So that's tough, especially when you have a elite passing offense like Washington to play in those conditions. But they just haven't looked very good. So it's kind of been the two teams going in different directions. But this is a game where the winner gets into the college football playoff, guaranteed. It's the only one of these conference championship games. Some people would say the SEC winners getting in no matter what, but there, in my opinion, is a path where Alabama gets left out. Um, so this is the only game that's a pure play-in, no matter what the winning team is in the college football playoffs. So should be an awesome game. It's in Vegas on a neutral field, which is going to be super fast track on an NFL field. There's tons of speed on these two teams. And so it should be really exciting. But what do you think high level on this game?
Yeah, I made the number 6.5, so 9.5 seems kind of a bias towards Oregon looking good lately. I agree, Oregon State game. Like, I mean, give them credit; they deserve it. But at the same time, like, I'm not buying too much into it. Utah, I don't really buy into any of their wins. Like, I don't think this was, in hindsight, obviously it's all relative, but I mean, this is a Utah team who's started QB2, who was like fighting for the QB2 position all year, and ended up finding a spot. So like, yes, they were a good team, but I still just don't give those wins like incredible merit. I mean, they almost lost to a Florida team at the start of the year that had like 6 turnovers and almost lost that game. So not buying into that a ton. So I would say I'm lower than most on Oregon. I like this Washington team. I also have Washington to win the national championship, not 66-1. So my only thing on this would be: have you considered betting Oregon money line, basically just for like your stake on Washington to win? So like basically to win whatever you're going to lose from Washington, because if you lose that, basically you're just hedging out of, like, basically just slowly nitpicking at your Washington championship future.
No, so what I actually have thought about doing and I've put a little bit on it and I'm deciding whether I want to put more is actually on an Oregon national title future at 5-1. Because again, if they win this game, they're in the playoff for sure. And then assuming things go a certain way, they would be playing Michigan, which would be a very close spread and would then be easier to hedge out there against Michigan if you wanted to. I think the tough part would be then if they got to Georgia, even that spread would be much more manageable to hedge out of than this one if they were to keep winning. I just I think there might even be a better opportunity live. Like I think this game could
Yeah.
be closer live, which you're starting to, I don't know. I guess it's much riskier, obviously, if you do that. But I think that you could easily see Washington up a touchdown some point in the first half of this game, where you could then get a better live line on Oregon. Because I don't know. It's so much juice for a
Yeah.
hedge opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I think if this gets live though, you at least buy enough to win what you're going to lose off Washington, because like hypothetically, if they win, you win that bet, you lose Washington, you're fine, you're 0. If they lose, Washington wins, and now you can continue hedging. Just basically, you basically made your 66-1 into like what, like probably a 48-1 by
Hmm.
losing $300 off of what would have been 6,600. So no, you would have made it 62-1, which is amazing still. So
Yeah,
I would look at least live, like have the idea of hedging with some Oregon here.
yeah. I put a little bit on an Oregon future because I do think honestly I think Oregon would beat Michigan on a neutral in the college football playoff. I think that game would be pretty close to a coin flip in terms of the spread, but I would personally take Oregon in that game. Um, and but yeah, I think live if I can get under a touchdown or we're on the money line like around minus like 250 to 300 would be much more manageable than where it is right now. Where would it be right now?
345.
345. Yeah, somewhere between 250 and 300 would probably be like a point that I would look for, like 275, anywhere in that range. But yeah, I do just getting back to the game. I do agree with you that I do think this line is overinflated because of the uh, just kind of the sentiment towards both teams right now, where I think Washington has been on kind of cruise control, where it's like they won that game against Oregon and their mentality switched to like we just have to survive to the Pac-12 championship game, whereas Oregon lost that game and then went like we got to go prove it now and run up numbers. And like if you like this gets into the Heisman race a little bit, but when you look at like the bad teams that Oregon has played and the bad teams that LSU has played, Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix are both late in the fourth quarter, up 21, like throwing the ball vertically down the field, like trying to put up more points, pad more stats. Whether that's for the Heisman or that's just coaching, like those coaches want to keep scoring. Like I think it's probably a bit of both. But when you look at some of Washington's games, they get up and get like pretty conservative and almost to a fault in some of their games that have been closer than they should have because I think they've gotten a little conservative when they've had leads. But I think this game, and again, we're talking about potentially trying to hedge out of the Washington position in terms of national title. But I also think that there's value on the spread in Washington. Like you said, I think it should be closer to a touchdown. So getting 9.5 is pretty good value. And I do think, as much as I was saying this is going to be fast track in Vegas with a lot of speed, I think it is an under game. I'm going to be playing the under for a little bit, which is terrifying with these two teams that don't play a ton of defense and have very good offenses. But I think with the familiarity, definitely helps the defenses a little bit in this game where both offenses are so explosive that just that little bit of familiarity might help a bit. But more than anything, I think both these teams are going to try to run the ball a lot. I think Washington's much more vulnerable defensively against the run than against the pass. And I think Oregon, as much as Bo Nix is maybe going to win the Heisman, I think Bo Nix will win the Heisman if Oregon wins this game. And as much as they're going to have the quarterback who's the Heisman winner, I think they're a better running team than they are a passing team. I think they're going to run the ball a ton and try to control the clock, but I think Washington's going to try to do the same thing. I think time of possession is going to be like a huge battle in this game that both teams want to win. That could be kind of the difference because when you look at Washington's probably second or third biggest game of the year was against USC, and they looked at the USC defense and they're like, obviously USC's run defense is a joke, so like that obviously has something to do with it. Whereas Oregon has a much tougher defense than USC, but it was the same kind of concept where you see Caleb Williams on the opposite sideline and you're like, what is our goal for this game is just don't let Caleb Williams have the ball. And they ran the ball like 25 times. Dylan Johnson had 256 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns in that game against USC, where you think of Washington as having maybe the best passing offense in college football. But they were like, why would we rush up and down the field trying to throw deep shots when that just gets the ball back to Caleb Williams when we could just run, run, run. And again, that's much easier against USC than against Oregon. But I think both teams are going to try to run the ball a lot. And I think I'm going to end up playing a little bit of Washington at plus 9.5, a little bit on the under 66, and then maybe try to get a live hedge out position if Washington can take a lead or just keep it close later into the game.
Yeah, it's not a bad look. I sit on some Washington and some Caleb and some Penix with you, so would be fun to see Washington do well here.
Yeah, I mean, people have kind of discounted Penix from the Heisman discussion. It's really turned into more of a two-horse race, but I think if he goes for 350 and 4 touchdowns in this game and goes undefeated and beats Oregon again, I don't see how he doesn't immediately rocket back up towards the top of the odds. I mean, there's no way you could give it to Bo Nix over him if he beats him twice in 1 year. It would then be him versus Daniels rather than Nix versus Daniels. But
Agreed. I'm on the bandwagon of Daniels. So uh, I'm hoping that I'm hoping Bo Nix loses, Penix goes up, but I have a Penix 9-1 and a Daniels 6-1. So either way, I'm happy there. Just no
yeah,
Bo Nix. I have no
anybody
Bo
but
Nix
Bo
available.
Nix. Yeah, I don't want Bo Nix to win the Heisman either. It's just doesn't seem right. As somebody who's watched Bo Nix for 5 years, him getting a Heisman just makes me uncomfortable.
His
Um,
uh his check down ability is very good, but he's not a Heisman quarterback.
no, he's on a very good team, and yeah, it's the throws. If you put the three highlight packages up, the Penix highlight package, the Jaden Daniels highlight package, and the Bo Nix, it's Jaden Daniels 1, Penix 2, Bo Nix 3. If you're just looking at the plays they've made, but it should be a really exciting game. I just hope that it's not kind of what the market is telling me it's going to be. I hope it's much more competitive than that. Um, and I still think at the end of the day, the best player on the field, either team, either side of the ball, is Rome Odunze. I think when push comes to shove, when there have been times, especially since that Oregon game, where Washington is having some struggles offensively, like, and you're thinking maybe this is the game that they get upset. Michael Penix just finds a way to get the ball to Rome Odunze, and 99% of the time he's made the play and scored a touchdown when they needed it most, or picked up a first down when they needed it most. And it's something that you can't really quantify. It's not going to be in like the numbers anywhere, but I've watched pretty much every minute of every game this team has played. And having somebody that on 3rd and 8, you're just like, you just know he's going to run the perfect route. And if you put the ball in the perfect spot, he's going to catch it. It's same as Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State. Like, it's just something you can't quantify, but it's a difference maker. And I do think he's better than any skill position player that Oregon has. So that could be a difference in at least keeping it inside the number. But if you're good on that game, we can move on to Saturday.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it. We got a lot of games.
Start with the MAC. Miami, Ohio is +8 against Toledo. Over under is 44. This is on a neutral field in Detroit. One quick trend on this game. Normally, trends like this I kind of throw out the window, but I think the MAC is a special conference that kind of goes the same way every year. And that is MAC underdogs are 12-5-1 against the spread in MAC championship games in the last 18 years. And again, normally if this was like the ACC, I would be like, who cares? But there is something to these MAC teams. The talent gap from the top of the MAC to the bottom of the MAC is just not as big as it is in any other conference. And there's something to these teams just are really ugly. There's not tons of talent. There's not great line play on either side of the ball. And these games just find a way to stay close. These two teams did play in the regular season, and Toledo won by 4. But Miami did have Brett Gabbert, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the MAC. When that game was played, he is out. And they now have Avion Smith as their quarterback, who's playing now, who's much more of a running quarterback versus Gabbert, who's more pro style. And that has turned them into more of a running team overall. But I think that's actually helping them here because you can run on Toledo. Toledo does not have a very good run defense, and this Miami team, that's really what they're looking to do now. Whereas Toledo is a team that's looking to pass. They have Daquan Finn, who probably is the best quarterback in the MAC. The last couple of years has been one or two, depending on who you like. But Miami's been elite in the secondary. Their defense is really, really good. They're 5th in the country in explosive plays allowed. They really don't give up a lot over the top or explosive rushing plays either. So this is going to be a really defensive game, probably a pretty ugly game. And for that reason, I'm taking Miami +8. I think over a touchdown in this game. I just think it's ugly. Miami's going to run the ball a lot, and it's going to stay close. But do you have anything here?
Yeah, this got bet by some groups at 7 Toledo. But off of a flat 7, I struggle. It's tough for me to find simulations that are 10, 11, 2 touchdowns. Like, uh, I do agree that this probably gets ugly. You see a total at 44. Usually, if this was to fall down to like 42, I would be on an over. I had this 46 and a half. But overall, like, I don't know. I see a Toledo team who kind of came into a Buffalo game, had a kick return touchdown, a fumble return touchdown, and then slowed the ball down for 3.5 quarters. Really didn't impress me versus the team that they should have just cakewalked through. And I think that people over dramatize what Toledo wants to do here. So I think this one's really slow. 8, I laid off. I'm at like I would probably be on at a 10, but I do think this game plays really close. It's just Gabbert leaving or not leaving, got hurt, but Gabbert being out hurts a lot. Avion has played quarterback in the past. I do think that he's plenty fine to play in this situation and these stakes, but is he good enough to win? I don't think so. And if I don't think that they're going to win, like I think it's non-zero, but I don't think it's very high that Miami Ohio wins this game. And if I don't think what are the outcomes that are non-win in an ugly game? I think that most of them stay within 8. So we lean towards the dog, but I don't want to be opposite of any groups here. So didn't take basically anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the MAC. I think it's the one conference where it's hard to say what's going to happen because just really weird shit happens.
It's unfortunate Gabbert got hurt because I will say Gabbert can sling that thing too.
Yeah.
I liked watching him in that Miami game. Like they didn't play good. If you go back and watch the numbers, they don't look good by any means. But he was. I mean, they just don't have the offensive line versus somebody like Miami. Like
yeah,
they were right to him, but he was trying. Like he was chunking.
He can make throws. So,
yeah. Props to him. And sucks that he's not going to be playing in this game.
Yeah. Moving on, we can run through these group of 5 games a little bit quicker. Mountain West is Boise State -2.5 against UNLV. This is going to be in the same building as the Pac-12 championship game the night before, which is a UNLV home game in Vegas. But Boise State is a 2.5-point favorite. Boise State, was crazy. Boise State didn't know they were playing in this game until Sunday morning. They won on Saturday, and they were tied with San Jose State in terms of record, conference record, tiebreakers, everything. And in the Mountain West, it goes to basically the old BCS computers that used to determine who made the national championship game, determined who was the better team between Boise State and San Jose State. And Boise State woke up Sunday morning and were told that they were playing in this game. So definitely the most unique circumstance of any team playing this weekend. But these teams have kind of been polar opposites this season in terms of UNLV came out hot. They played really tough out of conference. They played Michigan out of conference. And as soon as they got into conference play, just started rolling. They've been really exciting to watch. Their offense has been one of the best, obviously in that conference, but even in the group of 5, one of the best offenses. But defensively, they have a lot of holes. They can definitely be exposed defensively. And Boise State, again, talking about their weird circumstances getting here, they're also the only team playing in a conference championship game with an interim head coach. They fired their head coach like 3/4 of the way through the season and just kind of been rolling since that coaching change. Part of that is they have finally gotten healthy. They have one of the best rushing teams in all of college football. George Holani and Ashton Jeanty are their 2 running backs. Ashton Jeanty is basically like knockoff Derrick Henry. He's gigantic and just kind of like runs people over. And he's Mountain West. Derrick Henry is probably a nicer way to put it. But he's legit. I think he'll be an NFL running back. They're a very good running team, and UNLV can be run on. And UNLV's an explosive offense. I think there's going to be a lot of points in this game, a lot of possessions, and it should be really exciting. But do you have an edge anywhere here?
Yeah, I really like Taylor Green too. A guy who really hasn't had to run the ball a ton because they do have so many running backs. But I mean, let's see. The last 5 games he's played, his long has basically been over 15 yards. So a guy who can run the ball when needed. I think that he can throw the ball plenty fine. 6'6", 225. He is a big quarterback. So UNLV, they've been good all year. Don't get me wrong, but they've like just going through like box scores. I don't think that it tells you a true story. They beat up on a New Mexico team. It's going to be the first one highlighted. Like if you ever look at any passing yards per game summary or anything like that, they beat a New Mexico team 56-14 in a game that New Mexico, like they were jogging on defense. Like they literally, if you go watch that, they did not want to be there. So don't really put any weight into that game. Wyoming 34-14 is a decent win. Air Force, with all the injuries and situations they've had, they beat them by 4. Don't think that that's an amazing win. And then San Jose, who I think is more predictive of what a Boise State team is, they lost 37-31. So just going based off that, I do think this is plays to a higher tempo, to a higher scheme. Like we just saw a similar team in San Jose play 68 points. I'm not playing a 59. I would play a 57 for an over here. Lean towards Boise. Granted, like full transparency and awareness, my numbers have liked Boise State for the last like 3 years. Like it's one of those teams that just I think it's from a scheme standpoint, I get stuck betting Boise way too often. So I didn't bet this. I made Boise almost 6 point. Like I'm at like 5.7. And so I laid low, but I do lean towards the Broncos to get it done.
Yeah, I think like I said at the beginning, I have a Boise State 2-1 Mountain West Conference future. And so my bet is that I'm just letting that ride. I'm not putting more down, but I'm also feel no need to hedge it because I do think they're the better team. I do think they should win the game. I probably would be playing Boise State if I didn't have the future, but for me, that is sufficient action on this game at 2-1. I'm happy with that. And if I was to play anything else, it would honestly probably be the over. Like you said, the number has gotten pretty high at 59, but I do just not see a ton of stops in this game. And the only thing that gives me pause is I do think both teams will be like run first, which is just tough with a total of 59, with both teams wanting to run the ball. Even if they'll be explosive and effective running the ball, it's still just limits possessions a little bit more. But yeah, I'm confident in Boise State. I think they're on a roll coming into this game, and I think UNLV has been a little overhyped, and Boise State will get the win. So we both like Boise State there to win the game. So yeah, that would be the lean. Would be Boise State -2.5. In the American, this game I'm actually very excited for. SMU is +3.5 at Tulane. True home game for Tulane. In New Orleans, over under is 47, which is pretty low for an American Conference game, with these offenses that have been pretty explosive. Obviously, part of the reason there is SMU will be without Preston Stone, their quarterback, who has been one of the best quarterbacks in all the group of 5 this year. SMU been one of the best offenses. And this line, in my opinion, was originally set too high. This line was at like 5.5 on open. I played it at 5.5. Obviously, those numbers aren't too key, but the 4.5 definitely comes into play in these games. So I'm happy to have the +5.5 there. I just think this SMU team is much better, and you're getting a bit of a bargain because they're without their starting quarterback. And again, the same thing you were saying for Boise State. I've been very biased against this Tulane team going into this year. I wanted to fade them. I didn't think they would win this conference. And they've been very good. I thought they were going to have a big drop off without Tyjae Spears and some of the talent they had on last year's team that was so good. And Michael Pratt, their quarterback, has been a lot better than I actually expected him to be. So definitely gets a lot of credit. But I think when people think of this SMU team, they think of the offense because they put up a ton of points. But this is a really solid defensive team, especially in the passing defense. They're top 5 in EPA per pass allowed, which is really not what I think people associate this team with. But I think they're going to give Michael Pratt a lot of issues. I think Tulane's going to struggle to move the ball. And I think just real quick on this backup for SMU, for people that don't know anything about him, which I don't blame you. I didn't until I kind of dove into it for this. His name's Kevin Jennings. He has played in a couple games this season in relief for Preston Stone, and he's been really solid. 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and completion percentage of around like 65%. And again, those are coming into games that have been blowouts in a lot of circumstances. So playing against teams and not totally real situations, but a lot of the times you see the backup quarterback come in and do something stupid and make a mistake. So he's been solid when called upon, and I think this system is set up for him to succeed. And really, where I think the biggest edge is this SMU passing defense. So I still like SMU at +3.5. But what do you see here?
Yeah, and if you watch Preston Stone this year, like he's good. Don't get me wrong. Was a really highly recruited kid. I think he's always like a mid 4-star. Um, but he just doesn't make passes that like just makes me think that if he leaves the game, that the backup quarterback can't make. You know, like you see a guy who is like making the correct read or throwing a pass that was set up by the offense. Like I don't think that he was the make or break of this team. I agree with you with Tulane. Like I expected Tulane to be. So fun fact: Tulane's like my secondary team. Everybody has allowed to have a primary and a secondary. I love Tulane. Their colors. They got the green wave fighting logo.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's great. But there's much to be like left on the table and to be desired. They looked good versus Ole Miss. I think that was a really big testament to QB2. QB2 brought a lot of spark to an offense who now sees a 47 total. So it's like Pratt's good. I understand that they can't just take him out. He's been good for too long to be able to do that. But I think that the future of Tulane is not looking too bad. SMU shut down an Oklahoma passing offense, and I would expect them to do the same thing here. So I do lean towards the side. I don't think you can take it at this point. 3.5 at +12 too. So it looks like it's going to fall down to a flat 3, but 5.5. That's where I would lean. I know a few groups bet an under 47. So lean towards the under, lean towards SMU, but you're looking on numbers that are kind of cooked at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree. That's where I would lean with both sides. I took it at 5.5, and I'm happy with that number. But yeah, I think it's going to be a much more defensive game than people think. I guess if you look at the total, then maybe not. But just in terms of perception, I feel like people think of this as like a
100%.
shootout type of matchup, and it's definitely not what it's going to be. Moving on to the Sun Belt, the last group of 5 game we're going to talk about. The App State is +6 at Troy. It's a true home game for Troy. The over under is 53.5. App State is playing in this game because the NCAA said JMU is not allowed to play in this game for some reason, even though they were the best team in this conference. It's a rule that I will never understand. But we have App State and Troy. App State has been on fire. They've won 5 straight games to end the season to get into this game. They went to JMU and won on the road. JMU's only lost of the season with College Game Day there, so that was a big game that probably more people were paying attention to. They smashed Georgia State and Georgia Southern coming into this game. Their last 3 games of the season were those 2 in JMU, so they've been on fire. They're playing well at the right time. App State is a team that always seems to. This is one of those things you just watch college football for enough years and you see App State as a road dog and you're like, yeah, they're probably going to win the game. They're just one of those teams like they did against JMU this year. And I think there's some value in the number on App State. But what do you see in this matchup?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I hope to come into this conference championship with one of my favorite tickets of the year. I took Coastal Carolina 39-1 halfway through the season when McCall got hurt. Basically thought QB2 wasn't that bad, and they kind of shot this number. All that had to happen last week was Coastal to win or App State to lose, and neither of those even came close. Like Coastal got crushed, App State crushed, and so now I'm just kind of sitting on my high horse, sad that this is App State Troy. I do think App State playing good football at the right time. The big thing for me is this total. I mean, I understand App State's been scoring the ball. They do play kind of fast. I mean, they scored 55 points last week. Granted, Georgia Southern has given up. Like, if you watch that game, I think you can see it. I have a jersey of Georgia Southern's quarterback right there. they have given up. Um, I think this under 53.5 would be my opinion on the game. I mean, this is the same team we saw scored 26 versus James Madison, but it went to overtime. They scored 24 versus Coastal when Coastal was playing good. Troy is a team that does not, in particular, care to play fast. Um, and I think they're playing fine at slowing this down. So 53.5, I think this number's a little too big. I played a little bit of an under. I didn't touch it very much, but 52 being a really big key. I'll gladly take an under here.
Yeah, that's definitely where I would lean with the total and the dog in this game. Like I said, I have an App State plus 750 to win the Sun Belt ticket, and I'm letting it ride in this game. So that is obviously all the action that I need on it. I do think there's still some value in App State, which is part of the reason I'm not hedging out of it, is I think they have a pretty decent shot to win this game. And yeah, I agree. I think both teams are going to run the ball a lot, and Troy is a tough defensive team, so I would lean towards that under as well. But we can get into the last four Power Five games. Still a lot of games. Georgia is -6 against Alabama, over under 54.5. This game in Atlanta, as it has been the past few years. One kind of key injury to keep track of heading up to kick is Lad McConkey for Georgia. He didn't play last week against Georgia Tech, and he's questionable as of now with a leg injury of some kind. So he would be a big loss. He has been kind of outside of Brock Bowers, like the number two go-to guy over the past couple of years for Georgia. So that would be a big loss. And I think this game, this is boring to say, but really could go either way. Like if Alabama somehow pulls off the upset, is it the most shocking result of the weekend? No. If Georgia wins by 14, is it the most shocking result of the weekend? No. So it's boring, but it really could go either way. The one thing I'll say is I think people are underrating Alabama a bit. I think everybody in America was watching that Iron Bowl last week and what Alabama needed to do to win, and Auburn losing to New Mexico State the week before, and people are like, "Oh, Alabama stinks." And I guess what nobody was doing was watching Georgia play a one possession game against Georgia Tech, who is also bad. So it's not like Georgia was doing anything incredible last week. It's just nobody was paying attention to that game, so they don't get the same public perception as people have against Alabama. And if you look at Alabama's scores before last week, I think people think they're have kind of like snuck into this SEC West or SEC championship game somehow, but I mean, Chattanooga is not a real team, but put up 66 on Chattanooga. They beat Tennessee, Kentucky by 28 on the road. They beat LSU by 14. They beat Tennessee by 14. They beat Texas A&M on the road. Like it's not like they beat Ole Miss by 14. Like they since the Texas game, outside of that weird game against I don't know what that was against South Florida, it just popped up on the screen. I don't know if and it's still doing it. I have no idea what that is.
Nice.
Um, so hopefully that doesn't keep happening, even though it's still happening. I'm just going to keep going. Um, and So Alabama really has been good since that Texas game. They played that weird game against South Florida the next week where Nick Saban benched Jalen Milroe to basically prove a point. But then ever since then, before the Iron Bowl, they really had totally taken care of business. So that's the one thing I will say just in high level on this game is I think people are kind of underestimating Alabama, and I think people are underestimating Jalen Milroe. I think he's gotten way better as the season's gone on. I think since that Texas game that they lost, he's a completely different quarterback now than he was then. And I think Georgia's defense is way more vulnerable than it's been the past 2 years in their past two national championship winning seasons. I think these defenses, Georgia and Alabama, are way more comparable than they have been, like in last year's well, Alabama didn't even make last year's SEC championship, but Georgia was in last year's SEC championship. These two teams give up the same amount of yards per play defensively. Like I don't think they're that far off from each other, and I don't think the quarterbacks are very far off from each other. And so I think this is. I don't really like the number of 6 in either direction, but I do think it's closer than people think.
Yeah, I agree. An Alabama fan through and through, so it's easy for me to say. But just looking at DraftKings, like I could go break down like the game. I think that Auburn kind of showed the blueprint to how to beat Alabama. I really don't think our defensive line is as good as everybody gives credit for. Auburn, like I don't even know if they completed a pass. Like it was basically no passes all game. Let me pull that number. I'm actually curious. I think it's really close to zero. Um, but like so, like you see, if you want to Peyton Thorne, 5 completions all game. Two of those, 5 completions, 2 interceptions. So uh, three more completed passes than defensive completed passes. But this an Alabama team, I mean, you know what you're getting. And to basically discredit them for the season that they've been able to produce, I think is crazy. So like just looking at like current lines, I think that a good price would be if you like Georgia or Alabama in that sense. You can get tie in the first half and then either team to win. So tie dash Georgia at 19-1. For this to be a tie game at half would be like I understand that the potential outcomes are tough, but at the same time, like, I think that's how this game plays. It's a neutral field in Atlanta. Everyone says neutral. Like, it will be absolutely packed. It wouldn't surprise me if this is a pretty conservative first half overall, slow pace, slow tempo, trying to figure out like this is the biggest game that this biggest game both quarterbacks have ever played in. Carson Beck,
Mhm.
a guy who I think is pretty decent, but like, I mean, Carson Beck is. You have to remember how young this kid is. So a slow half wouldn't surprise me by any means, and then Georgia or an Alabama to close it out. Alabama, you can get 30-1, Georgia 19-1. With Georgia being the favorite that they are, I think it would make more sense at the 19-1 price point. But I do hope that inevitably the tide roll.
Yeah, and the only other thing I will say, people have obviously been talking a lot about the Iron Bowl because it was a crazy game just happened last week. But the same thing happened when Georgia played Auburn. Georgia went on the road to Auburn. The game was 10-10 at halftime. Georgia ended up winning 27-20 by winning the game in the fourth quarter. And Peyton Thorne had 10 completions for 82 yards in that game. They did the same thing basically against Georgia that they did against Alabama. They just ran the ball, and Georgia really wasn't able to stop it. So it's
I
and
went
people, yeah, go ahead.
I went to the Alabama Clemson basketball game. I think it was Tuesday, and Isaiah Bond sat right in front of me, the grave digger himself. And first off, if people think that they don't pay college kids, like this kid had a full on diamond chain on with 007 across his chest, off white shirt, but he was like a local celebrity. It was so funny to watch. Every person can take pictures with him, but he's just trying to
Yeah,
enjoy a basketball game. But man of the hour, the gravedigger himself. What a game! What a game!
yeah. Well, it's also nice that college athletes don't have to pretend that they don't get paid anymore because they've always been
Sure,
paid. But now with
100%.
NIL, they can just be like, oh yeah, I can walk around with this, not just walking around in the team, so like the team sweatsuit that they used to always just rock that because it looked like they didn't have money even though they did. Um, but yeah, I think if Georgia scores early and I could get over 7 on a live line, that would be really interesting to me. Georgia scores first, or if it's somewhat close at halftime. That could be interesting to me. I do think I would not play Georgia in this game. I think if you're going to play it, it's Alabama, maybe even an Alabama money line. Just take a shot on it. Honestly, I think if Alabama stays within the number, then I mean, obviously they'll have a good chance to win. So um, I think that's interesting, and I also would lean the under when it comes to the total. I think people are expecting a lot of points in that game. Um, but like I said, I think both defenses are actually tough. So and yeah, two very inexperienced quarterbacks in big games like this. So um, that's where I would lean, and yeah, I'm rooting for Alabama in that game too. So um, roll Tide, and on to the Big 12. Oklahoma State somehow is playing in this game. They are 15.5 point underdogs to Texas. The over under is 55. Um, this is technically on a neutral field, but it's in Dallas. It's probably going to be 75% Texas fans. Um, and this is going to be Texas's last ever Big 12 game. I think it makes a lot of sense that they would want to go out on being the conference champions. That would be kind of a fuck you to the conference for them, where people were kind of making fun of Texas and Oklahoma last year when both of them had pretty bad seasons, saying like, we don't really need you in the conference. Texas by far the best team in this conference this year. Um, so I think for multiple reasons, Texas is really going to try to make a statement in this game. I think they're going to go hard from the first snap. The other reason is obviously being the playoff. We haven't talked too much about the playoff because a lot of these games, it's pretty obvious the path that the team needs. Where I think Texas is probably Texas and Florida State are the two that are a bit ambiguous about what they really need to do. In my opinion, if Texas wins, they should be in. I think I would put them in over an undefeated Florida State, which is probably pretty controversial to a lot of people. But I think Texas going on the road and beating Alabama, in my opinion, is still the best win that anybody had in the regular season in college football this year. I think people look at some of their scores for the games that Quinn Ewers missed and are discounting this team. I think people don't realize how good they are defensively. They're just as good as any of these teams that we're talking about, Georgia, Alabama, any of these teams, especially on the front, on the line, which makes this a terrible matchup for Oklahoma State, who all they can do is run the ball. They have Ollie Gordon, who's a monster. He's had an unbelievable, especially second half of the season. But their quarterback, Alan Bowman, is a nobody. He is not going to be able to beat Texas throwing the football. And I think Texas is going to be able to load the box and basically shut down the Oklahoma State rushing attack. And also, I think this Oklahoma State secondary is really vulnerable. And I think Quinn Ewers is going to be able to take deep shots to their receivers that are some of the best receivers in the country. And I really think Texas runs this up. I bet Texas when it was at 14. If I had to pick a side at 15 and a half, it would still be Texas. I'm happy that I got the 14, but I think Texas wins this by 21 plus. I also bet the Texas team total over 34 and a half before it moved. It's now at 35 and a half, which makes it a little bit tougher to play there. But I really think Texas wants to make a statement in terms of showing that they belong in the playoff. And I think they try to put up a huge number here.
Yeah, I agree. I bet Texas at 14. Unfortunately, 14 is not available for people listening. Just like scrolling through so I could try to give some like actionable advice. It's so juicy, but double result, halftime, full time, Texas, minus 260. Very, very juicy. I understand, but like I don't hate it. I agree. My biggest thing here, like first off, I think they have to run up score. They need that. Second, we haven't seen Sarkisian really have to draw up some offensive schemes in quite some time. I think they could kind of float through most of this regular season. The schemes that he had to draw were versus the likes of Alabama when he put it all on the line, and we saw them absolutely sauce up Alabama in the long ball. Really had nothing, had no game plan to stop it. This is this is make or break. They basically have to win by double digits or they're not getting into the playoffs. Because I do think right now the sentiment kind of does seem like Florida State gets in over, but does a 28-point Texas win change that? And I think yes. Sarkisian, this might be a hot take, I'm not sure, but I think he's one of the best scheme coaches I've ever watched. I think offensively he can draw up some play. Like we saw him use Devontae Smith in ways that a guy of Devontae Smith's stature has never been used before. And it wouldn't surprise me if they do the same here. Texas completely out talented, needing points. I think they're the side, however you can get it. Double result minus 260, minus 15. If you could just wait a minute and get a 14 of the live lines, however you can get it, I think Texas is the side here.
Yeah, I think they're going to run it up, and I think they will be able to. I think Oklahoma State is going to struggle to score, and it could get out of hand. So, yeah, I think play Texas any way you can. Definitely the most boring game of the weekend is the Big Ten championship game. The total of 35 would be the lowest total of any conference championship game since those things have been tracked. Thanks to Iowa, who is possibly the worst offense in the entire country, and somehow ended up in this game. Thank God the Big Ten is changing going forward, where it's going to be the two best teams in the championship game, not at East versus West. So we could actually get Michigan, Ohio State, or the new teams, Washington and Oregon, seeing those teams play in the championship game rather than having to see a shitty team from the West every year. That'll be really nice. Um, I I really don't see how Iowa scores in this game. Their team total for the first half is zero point 0.5. Their team total for the second half is zero point 0.5. The market is basically telling you if in either half, if they can score any points, then that's basically the result that they'd be looking for. That's the coin flip, is whether or not they score. Um, and I I don't really care. I know based on the numbers, it's not quite there. I'm not sure. Well, what do you make this line?
24 and a half. But I will say I've kind of bet every Iowa over, just like, I mean, they had the lowest total in college football history the other day. It hit 24 at one point. So, and it should have won. It lost to an interception. They gave up the game winning field goal. It should have went to overtime and won. But this is a tough Iowa team. Like, I've downgraded them time and time again. I don't have them the worst offense in the nation. They do run some okay sets. They throw the ball a lot, but it's just like they love to punt the ball. They'll punt the ball from their own 40. So like if you could find a punt over, then that's a good look. Or Iowa total team touchdowns under half of a touchdown. Like, do I think that they're going to score? Probably. I assume that most of those are all field goals. So like 9 points. I made them. I gave them 7.3 points. Um, I think that most cases this is 6 points, and you see a couple Iowa field goals, but to score a touchdown versus Michigan defense. Michigan's defense is very good. And so that's how I would look at this. This is just such a weird game. Like, I mean, Iowa needs taken out to the clean. They should be moved to FCS. This is just like not. It's not even fun to watch. What
No.
I watched the entire game last weekend for God knows what reason. And it's miserable to watch. So their best starting field position was with 10 seconds left in the game. So I won't. I say I won't be watching this game. I'll probably be watching this game, but will not be enjoying watching this game. And hope that Iowa scores zero.
Yeah, well, what I was gonna say is I don't even care what the numbers dictate. I'm laying it with Michigan in this game. I
Yeah.
really just I don't see a path where Iowa scores a touchdown, like you said. Maybe they get a couple field goals. Maybe JJ McCarthy makes one stupid play that gives them really good field position and they get some points out of it. Um, but like you said, in I do think again, another thing that you can't really quantify, Jim Harbaugh coming off the 3 game suspension where Michigan has used this us versus the world mentality the last couple of weeks. And now Jim Harbaugh will be back for this game. And if you don't think he's going to try to run up the score, like Jim Harbaugh is a run up the score guy in general. Like there are certain college coaches that when they are huge favorites like this, you need to look at what they've done in these types of games. And Jim Harbaugh is a guy that is going to keep trying to score. And especially in this spot where they're not playing another game for a month, like it's not like you have Ohio State on deck next week and it's like, let's just get everybody out of there. Like they're not playing football for a month after this game. So he's going to keep his foot on the gas, in my opinion. And like you look, Iowa's played like one real team this year. They played Penn State, and that final score was 31-0. Penn State would covered the number without, and Iowa didn't score. Like it, Iowa's played a real defense, and Penn State and Michigan defenses are pretty equal by most numbers, and Iowa was unable to score against Penn State. I think that's going to happen again. I think Michigan could cover this game by accident. I think they could just kind of not even try and they would end up covering the number. But I think they are going to try because of Harbaugh's going to be pissed and try to run it up. And the Iowa, again, like you said, Iowa's going to want to punt the ball and play the field position game because that's how they win games in the Big Ten West is pinning teams deep and just not letting their offense get all the way down the field. But that's just not going to work against Michigan. Michigan's going to run the ball a ton and wear their defense down. And I think eventually just the doors are going to kind of blow open and Michigan's going to cover.
Yep, fully agree. It's Iowa at some point has to change their style. Like, stylistically, this has just been the worst team for quite some time.
Yeah, my mom's entire side of the family went to Iowa. They're Iowa football fans, and so I've watched a lot of Iowa football in my life. It's basically been the
Unfortunate.
same for my entire life, and it's horrible to watch. I refuse to. I mean, I'll root for them in certain situations just so that my grandpa's happy, but mostly it's I don't want them to win because it's just so brutal to watch that it makes me mad as a football fan. But so I think Michigan rolls. So we'll move on to the last game, which in terms of the college football playoff is probably the most important game on the slate. Florida State winning and losing could be the difference between a lot of things happening in terms of the top four. Even if they win, we'll get into it. If they will be in the top four, but they are short 2.5 point favorites. This line is basically sat at 2.5 all week. You can now get a plus 2.5 plus 100 on Louisville, but they really don't want to push it to a three because I mean it would move off the three very fast if anybody moved it to a three. I don't know. Have you seen a three at all? I don't think so.
I have not. I've only seen 2.5s.
Yeah, and I think at a three it would get hammered with Louisville money. I would have kind of been sitting waiting for a three that is probably not going to come. But
Yeah,
this
it's
game
trying.
is yeah, it's at
It,
plus 2.5 plus 100 a couple places.
yeah,
Um,
I see the minus 2.5 down to or minus 22 at FanDuel. So it's definitely trying,
yeah,
but I
it's
also
getting
haven't seen it
close.
yet.
Yeah, so if there is a three, I'll say that now. I'll be taking Louisville if a three pops. This game is on a neutral field in Charlotte, so it actually is kind of obviously there's a lot more Florida State fans than Louisville fans, but it is kind of halfway in between the two teams, so um, pretty fair neutral location, and it is outdoors in Charlotte. A lot of these games are indoors, neutral field games. This is going to be outdoors. Um, I'm going to be even if I end up not betting Louisville, which I don't know if I will if there isn't a three, I'm going to be rooting for Louisville. I really don't want to see Florida State in the playoff. It's a bye game, assuming that they play Georgia. It's going to be 14 between 14 and 17 point spread. Probably going to open around 14, and everybody's going to bet Georgia. It would be a blowout in my opinion, and it would just really be unfortunate to have to watch that. And I also don't want to have to deal. And so if Florida State wins, I will be rooting for them to get left out, even if they're undefeated, just for that reason. And also don't want to have to deal with people complaining that they got left out. So really, the best case for America, unless you are a Florida State fan, is or a Georgia fan that wants to play Florida State, then you will be rooting for Louisville in this game for the sake of the playoff. But this is kind of a weird matchup. Like we were saying with this Louisville team, they have played a lot of close games. They're definitely a good team. They can do good things on both sides of the ball, but they've just played in some weird games. But we've also said there's some coin flip games that they easily should have lost. But like last week against Kentucky, for example, they outgained Kentucky 403 to 289 and lost the game just with some terrible turnovers and giving up a couple stupid explosive plays. Like they losing that game was a terrible loss for them. They were the much better team by pretty much every measure. And then you look at Florida State's result last week. They ended up winning by 9 or whatever it was. But realistically, Florida was winning going into the fourth quarter and just kind of fell apart. Florida was playing with a backup quarterback as well. And it was just a weird game. Tate Rodemaker, the backup for Florida State, who's going to be playing in this game, he was 12 for 25 for 134 yards against Florida, who's 88th in the country in passing defense. They're not a good passing defense by any measure, and Rodemaker really struggled in that game. I think he's going to struggle again here. I think it's going to have to be an ugly game for Florida State to win. I think Louisville has the better team without Jordan Travis. I want that 3 would be really nice. But I think Louisville's going to find a way to win this game. I just think Florida State without Jordan Travis just doesn't quite have it.
Yeah, it's an interesting Louisville team in the sense that like I still don't think that they're that good. But if let's say hypothetically they didn't lose to Kentucky last week, I mean 11-1 going into your conference championship and they win, like wow, that's a win versus Notre Dame on the road. That's a win versus Duke on the road, Miami on the road, Florida State. Like
Yeah, they'd be in the
I mean,
playoff discussion themselves if they would have won that
yeah,
game.
which is insane to think about. They shouldn't be. There's no
No,
way they should be.
no.
But like you have the argument, but they lose to Florida. I mean, not to Florida. They lose to Kentucky. Don't allow it to happen. The interesting thing for me is like I just don't think Louisville is that good. I wish Jordan Travis wasn't hurt. If Jordan Travis isn't hurt, this number is probably closer to like what 6.5, 7, and I would be on Florida State 7 there.
Yeah.
I just can't trust a backup to like, no matter if this is adjusted for points. I don't think the backup in the situation can feel like a starting quarterback would. I would lean towards an under here. We're seeing Florida State kind of play slow. Like even in the Boston College game, Jordan Travis went out. I think it was halftime. He hurt his hand, left the game for a minute, and the entire time that he did, they basically ran the ball. They don't care to throw. He had to throw last game because situationally, like there's a lot more possessions. You can't just run the ball. You can't pull an Auburn. At some point, you do have to throw the football. But I think that like if you see a game that is close and they don't really have to come back from behind, like as you meant, like Florida was winning that game, they definitely had to throw. Um, if Florida State can get up early, or if this game is just hard nosed, I think that it's a lot lengthier possessions than you would imagine. It's kind of like how you were saying, keep the quarterback on the sideline type of just like a Washington football type of leave Caleb Williams on the side. Like I can see Florida State really lengthening some drives here, making this under 47 and a half look pretty good. So lean towards under 47 and a half, didn't take it, but I do lean that way. Probably lean towards Louisville winning this game outright, and I absolutely hate that. I don't think Louisville's good, and the hope is inevitably that they win this game. They get a little bit more juice, a little more steam, and then you can fade them in a bowl game.
Yeah. No, I agree. Get them in a good bowl game if they win the conference with 2 losses, and then
Let them
yeah,
play Ohio
fade
State.
them in a bowl game. Yeah, yeah, that'd be. I don't know if they would score. Um, yeah, I like the under in this game as well. I agree. I think it's going to be similar to that Florida State Florida game last week, where Florida State was comfortable with it just being an ugly game, and they were like, let's just go try to win in the fourth quarter, and they did. And I think they are going to have the same approach here. So I'm rooting for Louisville. If a 3 pops, I'm going to be betting Louisville. Other than that, I'm probably just going to leave it. Pregame, maybe get in live again. Like I've said in a couple of these spots, if Florida State scores early, unless they look really really good for some reason, but if Florida State is up 7-0 at the end of the first quarter or something like that, maybe try to get a little bit live on Louisville. But other than that, that's about it. Just as a quick recap, we'll both give our favorite bet or two from the entire slate. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, it would be some form of Texas. So let's just go Texas minus 15, and then probably an under in Troy versus Appalachian State, under 53 and a half, Troy App State.
All right, I like that. I'll say Texas is our consensus. Something that we can both say is our favorite. And again, yeah, we both got to 14, which is great, but I really don't think it's going to matter. I think Texas is going to win by 21 plus. So I love Texas, and the other one I'll say is SMU. I really like SMU. I think SMU is going to win the game outright, even though the value is going to come out of the number a little bit. I still think over a field goal, as long as you can get a 3.5 and not a flat 3. I think 3.5 is solid still because I think SMU is going to win that game. So we'll go with that. And we were talking pregame. Or pre-show. We're gonna end on this. Both of us just either in terms of the weekend and then even into the college football playoff rankings, which will come out, I guess, on Tuesday, as it has all year. Our hottest take for something that's going to happen this weekend or something that could happen going into who makes college football playoff. And I'll let you go first again.
Yeah, hot take. I don't think that it's correct by any means, but I do think that there has to be a debate that if Alabama beats Georgia, Washington, who would have had one loss and beat Oregon, has the ability to squeak into the conversation still. I don't know if an Alabama win versus Georgia, though looks very good, should not just instantly solidify them into the four spot. But who should that be? Should it be Florida State? Should it be Washington? I'm gonna lean towards the idea that I think Washington should at least get a little bit of merit if they can keep that Oregon game close.
Yeah, and if Florida State loses, and
Yeah.
that scenario becomes much more interesting. Yeah, if Texas, um, especially if Texas loses, which is again a long shot, we really don't think that's possible. But Texas losing is where a lot of crazy things could open up,
Oh yeah.
where that fourth spot could go to 12-1 Georgia, who just lost to Alabama. It could go to 12-1 Washington, whose only loss would be to a team that they had already beaten in the regular season. 12-1 or 11-1 Ohio State would be, I guess, the one other team that would get thrown into that equation. It could be pretty wild. Um, I'll go with the one I basically already alluded to and that we talked about before the show a little bit, and that is even if Florida State wins the game, they should be left out of the college football playoff. Um, and I tweeted this last week after the Florida State game, or maybe it was later in the week after the rankings came out. I was like, if you're a Florida State fan, realistically, would you rather, assuming you win this game and you get to say you won the ACC championship no matter what, would you rather go into that game against Georgia and have the month leading up to it that it's like, I guess the excitement of like maybe we can do this, and then you lose by 21 to Georgia, but you can say you were in the playoff? Or would you rather be undefeated ACC champions, get left out, go play in some other fun bowl game and whatever, and then for the literally the rest of your life, you can talk about how wronged you were being left out of the 2023 college football playoff. You were undefeated ACC champions and they didn't let you play. You would have been able to beat Georgia, like all these things you could say forever. And some Florida State fans were not happy with me. They thought it was the stupidest poll anybody had ever asked. Like, they're like, of course you want to make the playoff. Like, you always have a chance if you make it. They don't have a chance. Tate Rodemaker has a 0% chance of beating Georgia in a football game. It's just not ever going to happen. So no, they don't have a chance. If I was a Florida State fan, it's almost like a cop. You get like the free, like get out of jail free card of being like, no, maybe we would have won. They didn't let us in the playoff. Maybe we would have won. So I think they should be left out. I think this has the potential to be the best college football playoff we've ever had. I think if it's Georgia, Michigan, the Pac-12 champion, either Oregon or Washington, and then Texas at 4, I think that would be the best college football playoff we've ever had. I think Texas is one of the only teams that could fall into that 4 spot that could compete with Georgia. I think Oregon, Michigan would be an awesome game. And then whoever played in the national title between those 4 teams would be a really close, really exciting game. So I think we would be absolutely robbed of that potentially amazing playoff if Florida State wins. So I'm asking for them to be left out, and I think the committee, it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. They have heavily emphasized, like in their interviews that they were doing on ESPN, the guy from the committee is saying like our job is to put in the 4 best teams, not the 4 most deserving teams, and that's not totally true because that's just not how it's ever worked. Like it matters what your record is. It matters if you won your conference championship. Like that stuff does matter. But I think him publicly saying like our job is to take the 4 best teams is a little bit like planting the seed of like we could leave Florida State out if we wanted to, even if they're undefeated. So I'm rooting for them to just lose so we don't have to worry about it. But even if they win, I want them out.
Yep, agree. I think Texas at 4 is a dangerous 4 too. I think they could give Georgia a run for their money.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Would be an exciting playoff. Would be a great game. So that's it for this. 10 games. Hopefully, a lot of info people got out of this. Thanks to everybody that listened. If you don't already follow Corby, like I said, he's at Keep Betting Co. on Twitter. Link to the Discord would be on your Twitter. And there's lots of good stuff in there. Is there anything else you want to plug real quick before we go?
No, if you like college basketball, I do college basketball 3 times a week on BetUS college basketball, but college football wrapping up, college basketball in full swing. Just a whole bunch of transfer portal stuff, trying to stay on top of the game.
I will say in probably in January after the college football playoff, after bowl season's over, I'm gonna have you back on to literally just not even for people listening, just for me personally to catch up on everything that's happened in college basketball because
Yeah,
I
basketball is
just can't get
insane.
into it. I don't have the mental capacity to keep up with it until college football is over. So we'll definitely do that sometime in the new year to catch up.
Always down. My Blazers look real bad this year, though. I'm not gonna lie to you.
My Gamecocks look great. They've had a great start to the season, exceeding expectations. Just beat Notre Dame, so yeah, they're looking good. So yeah, we'll do that. But hopefully, people enjoyed this. It should be an awesome weekend. Conference championship games, and we'll just talk to you next time. Later.
But